Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer, and on today's episode, we've got another incredible guest for you. Kelly Benedict, the head of innovation and transformation for Gilbane, has flown in from DC to be with us here in Chicago in person to talk about digital transformation, change, disruptive technologies, and some of the opportunities presented by things like AI. This is going to be a great conversation. You are going to learn a lot. Work Inspired starts right now. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. We've been really eagerly awaiting this. We've been scheduling this for almost most of this year.
Feels like it, yeah.
And so much has changed since we first started talking about this. So I don't think there's a better place or time to discuss what we're going to be talking about today. And thank you for making the trip in here to Chicago to do this in person.
It's good to be back in Chicago.
So tell me, to start, tell me your professional story. How did you get to what you're doing today? And then maybe finish off with what are you doing today?
Okay, great. So I have been in the industry, when I say the industry, the architecture, engineering, and construction industry for almost 3 decades. As much as I kind of hate to say that out loud, that's the truth. And I've held leadership positions around strategy, business development, marketing, and innovation. And then every once in a while, I'd get initiatives that would be thrown my way where you have to, initiative around transformation where it incorporates a lot of change management aspects to it. So it kind of led me to where I was today. I sort of fell into innovation about 8 years ago at my last firm, where it really started out as a knowledge management issue within a company. It was a globally publicly traded property development company. And when the board would go from project to project around the world, they say, why aren't we doing this over here? Or why are we not doing that in New York? And so it really started as a knowledge management. So the CEO came to me and said, I'd like you to stand up the innovation program for the Americas region. And I was part of a global group, which was really such a fun thing to do. But I will tell you that, people talk about the imposter syndrome. So I was kind of like, I really don't know why me. And I remember sort of having the wherewithal to ask him, why do you think I can do this? Because most people, when you look at our competitors, they would come from, a technology background or, virtual design and construction. And here I was kind of strategy, business development, sort of client focused. And I'll never forget what he said to me, which was, I need somebody who can, you don't walk into a room and act like you know everything. And I need somebody who understands the business, how we make and lose money, has solid internal and external relationships, and understands the industry trends. And so I think he had a lot more confidence and maybe foresight than I did, which is probably why he's the CEO and I wasn't. So that kind of led into innovation. And then, it was time I had an opportunity to come over to Gilbane. And so I entered into a different role. They pulled me in with my background onto the Innovation Council, which was already established. And so I was a part of that team, and then next thing you know, I'm chairing that team, and then next thing you know, we created an actual function and a real role out of it. So today I have kind of 2 heads of the beast, if you will, where one is managing, leading, and heading up the innovation aspects of the company, and then also the other part is the digital transformation strategic efforts. So how do we get organized as a company to really deliver that value that we need to deliver in the digital transformation that's happening in our industry?
Very cool. So this head of innovation and transformation role at Gilbane was a new role.
It's a new role, yeah. Officially January.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Very nice. Well, I think many of our listeners know the name Gilbane, but talk a little bit about what Gilbane does and what makes Gilbane special.
So I love the word special because I really do feel that Gilbane's special. I mean, you could argue that they're paying me to be here, but I really, at the bottom of my heart, I've always admired the company. It's a 150-year-old family-owned and operated construction company. We have probably 46 offices throughout the country and internationally. And I've had a lot of great friends at the company. So when I had a chance to come over, I was really excited about it. But I think what makes it special is that family-owned and operated. I mean, I just came from a publicly traded company going into this, more of a private company. And I think there's pluses and minuses on both sides of it, as many people will tell you. But I think, you don't have to put the core values up on the wall. It's just deeply rooted. There's a lot of legacy in the company. People like to stay with the company. And I just think it's a really good, wholesome company. And even though we're big, about $6.5 billion in terms of revenue, there is an agility to it and some entrepreneurial sort of baked into how we deliver projects. So it's just a fabulous company, and I'm so lucky. And I hope I'll be here as long as they'll have me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, it is interesting. A 150-year-old company, you could say they're established, they've got a strong foundation, and then you layer on this new role of innovation, which clearly isn't new. Companies can't become 150 years old without innovating, right? But the pace of innovation and digital transformation is new and is accelerating. So how do you, coming from a public company, we look at tech startups, right?
Yeah.
Those are usually funded by venture capitalists. They have to go very, very fast. They get a bunch of cash, and they have to come up with a product, and a lot of them crash and burn because of that speed. Publicly traded companies are known for having to be more short-term thinking because of the shareholder price, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like with a privately owned company, a family-owned company, you've got a little bit more capability to look to the future, a little bit more long-term thinking. But the risk would be, it's been around for 150 years. Is it willing to change, right?
Yeah.
So how do you kind of think about, define, measure, activate innovation within a company like Gilbane?
Yeah. Well, I like what you said, because it's not that we haven't been innovating. I think the focus is how do you provide the framework to organize it and make it more tangible to the business and really show value. And so that's a lot about what we've been working on over the last couple of years. So I think defining innovation is really super important, because that word is tossed around a lot.
It is.
It means different things to different people. In fact, when I got the role at my former company, I told my son, who was 10 at the time, and he said, "Why on earth would they put you in charge of that role or in that business, that part of the business, when you don't even know how to work a remote control?" So clearly he's thinking, it's all technology, and he had a point. So I think it's, defining innovation. What does it mean for you as a company is really important, because it does mean different things to different people. And so we were really intentional about how we defined it. And we didn't want it just to be about technology. We wanted it to be, it's really about delivering shared value for our employees, for our clients, our partners, and the industry. We wanted to keep it broad, so that when we're working with different clients, some clients may think of technology as being innovation, and yes, we could go there, or they may think of process improvement, and yes, we can go there too. So that's what we chose to do. And so the other part, and everybody when they talk about innovation loves to talk about the sexy, shiny stuff, and that the startups and the venture capital, because that's fun, right? Yeah. But what I've learned through the School of Hard Knocks in innovation was that process is super important. And process is funny in innovation because it's never linear. Like, in our industry, things can be very linear. You do X, you get to Z. And with innovation, you put the framework together. It's sort of the roadmap, but sometimes you have to color outside the lines. Sometimes you have to be a little creative. And so it is, and there's a lot of gray area in it. And there's a tremendous amount of failure. And in our industry, traditionally, our margins are pretty tight. Risk, we take on a lot of risk for those types of margins. So it's like almost changing the mindset of people to be able to do safe experimentation, safe pilots, really tight hypothesis, really looking at the metrics, do a better job at storytelling. So when we do get a proof of concept, we can actually have people understand it and utilize it and get some value out of it.
It's interesting because I was listening to another podcast this week, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, surprise, surprise, was the guest on the show, and he was talking about where I think it's relevant is he was talking about when he was a bodybuilder, and the concept of failure in weightlifting, and the idea of when you work out, you're pushing your muscles to failure, but the reason you're doing that is so that they grow, right? And so that really success is failure in that sense, that in order to become the Mr. Olympia or whatever he was, he had to fail over and over and over, and that was almost the goal so that he could get to the place where he was. So I think it's relevant to innovation that you have to almost shift your perception of failure is not bad.
Right.
And some of that's kind of cliche, but it's true. Failure is required for progress.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I love that analogy because we often talk about building that muscle around getting people, how do you get people's hands dirty in innovation? Yeah. How do you develop a hypothesis? How do you start thinking when you don't really know that you're going to get a proof of concept? Like, how do you really start imagining what the metrics could be? What how are we going to measure this? And how agile can we be when we realize it's like we talk about in sales, getting in the sales bunker, the deal bunker.
Yeah.
You can't get out because you spent so much time in it. It's the same thing with innovation. It's like, can you be honest with yourselves to say, hey, you know what, this isn't really what we thought was going to happen, but here's what we learned about it, and using those learnings to drive value in the business as well. The other thing I'd say, and another analogy that popped into my mind was, you have to get used to getting some beer cans thrown at you periodically, because there's going to be some things that you do where people aren't thinking that it's innovative, and then you just kind of have to keep your head down, be willing to pivot and, stop, and then also, share those lessons about why we failed. And it is a total mind shift for our industry because we don't like failure.
Right.
Because when we fail, it's got big implications when we're delivering big projects around the world. Especially in construction, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, you've mentioned it a couple times, this imposter syndrome, or your 10-year-old saying, why you? It kind of clear to me why you, because you do have perception into the goals of the business, right? And so innovation or digital transformation is kind of a very general thing, that could be a lot of things. You could spend a lot of time getting not very far, but it makes sense that the CEO puts you in that role because you understand where the drivers are for the business.
Right.
So how do you prioritize digital transformation while making sure it aligns with what the business needs to do to keep being profitable?
I think first I'd start off by saying we worked with a third-party consultant at Gilbane to really go in and look and examine, where some of the potential gaps are, and really validate the fact that at the size of our company, the scale of our company, we probably want to do some more investing in this. And then once we identify what those gaps are, it's like, okay, so who's the team?
Sure.
So we brought in a brilliant woman from the banking industry as our chief information and digital officer. And then we came together. I was the first person on our team, and then we looked at data and analytics as a priority. So we hired, we have a head of data and analytics who is a true data scientist. We have a person that we promoted in terms of operations technology. So this person is really steeped into what actually happens on the job sites, which is the most important thing, right? So, and he's got a great personality and he's really strategic. And then cybersecurity, which is a big issue, So we formed a new team. The other part that's really been hopeful for me is that as we do our enterprise strategic planning, in the past we looked at it as, innovation and technology sort of enables. So it's sort of implied in our strategic efforts to drive growth and value for our employees and our clients. But what we did that's new is we actually put innovation and technology as one of the 4 key pillars. So now it's like, it's out there. I think it's explicit and people understand that we are making this a priority now. And from there, so now that it's really explicit rather, we've actually got a strategy that we've been working on since January where we're looking in through some of the stakeholder engagement, engaging with peer group constructs, functional leadership, really understanding and talking to people and understanding what are the key values or what are the key drivers, what are the key pain points, and starting to formulate what our focus areas are going to be to support the enterprise. And there's, probably four main areas, cybersecurity being one, data and analytics being another. Process simplification is a really big issue because I think there's a lot of technology where we end up just automating complexity. So not just like thinking that technology is the answer, but really looking at what's the process, where can we simplify, and so we've done a lot of I'll call them design thinking exercises with some of our major peer groups and looking at the whole cycle and understanding where are the pinch points there. Identifying shadow IT, where it has, when we bought the IT, it had positive intent around buying it, but did we really have the right people in the room? Did we really look at the process itself to figure out what kind of technology we wanted? So from there, we've got our focus areas, and then we've got initiatives, and then we've done a lot of work in terms of developing OKRs, so objectives and key results. So it's more aspirational, it's agile, but there's also associated return on investment, or at least measurable results on that.
That makes sense. Are you, if you it seems like a lot of your work is, the products have an implication with your customers, but it's internal discussions, bringing in the right stakeholders on the team. How much of your, would you say of your effort is internally focused, externally focused, or peer focused where you're aligning better with partners?
All of the above.
It's all, yes.
It's a great question, actually. And we kind of we talk about it as the ecosystem. And so I think that, we're engaged, and this has actually been very validating because there's some spin out there. But when I talk to people who are in the roles like I am, we're all pretty humble. Nobody has this figured out yet. And I think, when it's a small audience and you're not, putting stuff on LinkedIn, it's like we're all trying to get our arms wrapped around, the new realities. And so it's very validating to know that, we're all kind of in the same place. There's a few outliers.
Sure.
But so it's the frenemies, if you will, or our compatriots out there and sitting on panels and discussing and having these calls. The internal part is all about engaging with our, we have a lot of peer groups and functional leads and really that stakeholder engagement and change management approach. And then the external is, kind of having more of an open innovation system, ecosystem, if you will. So we're kind of looking at that, and we want to have a cost-effective ecosystem externally. We can't be everything to everybody.
Right.
And so looking at it from, who are we going to partner with from, in academia? Who are the startups that we want to partner with? Venture capital has been crucial for this. I mean, I always tell the story, 10 years ago, I can remember getting calls from folks about, hey, we have got this new recipe around carbon reduction with concrete, and I'd say, come on in. And I get the smartest people around the table in my business. And, we're not scientists. We don't really know if the product is viable. We don't know the financial viability of this, but by engaging with the venture capital world, they do all that vetting for us. And then they have scientists and they can really validate the technology around it. So that's been a big accelerator, particularly around sustainability. So it's really looking at, where do we want to be? And I always remember my mom in college or in high school would say, you don't have to be at every party every night. It's the same thing with innovation. There's new innovation things popping up. So it's really being disciplined around where you're going and where you're going to be, what are we giving, what are we getting, and something, and trying to be more intentional about that as well.
Well, this would be the right way to lean into our next question, but I do want to stay on the team for one more question. When you're looking at a team, an innovation team, or when you're thinking about digital transformation within an organization like Gilbane, how much of it is the role of specialists or champions? You talk about your 4 kind of key pillars of transformation. And how much of it is something that you have to bring all the employees, the whole team along for the ride? And, I think about, in a marketing sense, social media. Like we've got a big sales organization. Some people jump on social media and they use it really well and they feel very comfortable with it. And others want nothing to do with it. And so there's that question, it's like, all right, well, do we make them? Do we try to teach them? Do we try to change their mind? Or is it fine that we've got a smaller group of people that are really propelling that part of our digital marketing effort forward? And I think about the same thing with innovation and transformation, especially digital transformation within an organization. Do you need everybody along for the ride, or are you good finding those kind of disciples, for lack of a better word, that it will probably have more of an impact?
Yeah. What I would say is everybody's invited to the party.
Okay.
Everybody's invited to innovation. And I also like to say, but we don't hold hostages. Someone forwarded to me a cartoon one time, and I think this demonstrates, it was perfect. And it says, who wants to innovate? And everybody raises their hand because nobody's going to say they don't want to innovate. But then when it comes to, now you're ready to innovate, and the people realize how hard it is, then sometimes the hands go down. So we like to say everybody's invited. It's very inclusive. I have a T-shirt that says radically inclusive, but, we don't need to be hostages or hold hostages. And I think, Simon Sinek talks about the 17.5%. So you're always going to have early adopters. And I think the key is working with those early adopters, showing those use cases, getting better at storytelling, and really demonstrating return on investment that really can land with various different groups. So, if we're doing a project or a pilot out on the project site, if that doesn't add value right away, you've lost credibility. Sure. So it's like really that engagement with that team. And I'm finding that there's a lot of pent-up demand for this, but there's also a lot of vaporware. Yeah. So we have to be very intentional about what we put in front of people. And then when it comes to the digital transformation, ideally what we deliver would be available for everybody. So again, it's just like everybody's invited to the party.
Yeah. Well, and also You talked about change communication.
Yeah.
That's a key component too, right?
Yeah.
Because change is scary and innovation is change.
Yeah.
And if you can communicate it effectively, you'll probably have more people excited and keeping their hands raised when the innovation question remains.
I'm glad you said that, because we do have various communication channels baked into our strategy. One that I'll tell you about, which has been very successful, is we kind of branded this thing called Innovation First Fridays. And we do that obviously the first Friday of every month. It's 30 minutes. We offer training credits. We have a little over 3,000 employees. We probably get about between 300 and over 400 people on those calls.
Wow.
So it's a pretty good thing, and we keep it interesting. So, like, for example, last week, one of the things we want to do, we had worked with a startup, a really exciting startup. We had no idea if it was going to work, with a really big client. We got the client, their heads around it as well, and it was really it's a minority-owned founder, which ticks a lot of boxes around economic inclusion, and it was a sustainable idea that they were trying to start up. So we tried it. And the end of the story, because of time today, I don't have time to go through everything, but the end of the story was what we really wanted to show the business is, how do you advocate for innovation? How do you prioritize this? How do you work with a startup? And then it was also a really good opportunity for us to recognize and put people's names up in lights for the people that actually guided this process through.
Cool.
So we were able to really celebrate that effort. And I think that helps. And we did it in a way, I think, that anybody, whether you're an accountant, you're a superintendent, you're the CEO, you can really consume the value of advocating for innovation to get a proof of concept. And then also share where we failed. We had certain things that we thought, and then how we pivoted, how we had really honest feedback with the startup, and now we have a product that's really good. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One thing that's, I think, no one would question is that there's a lot to choose from, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about startups or software or apps,
Yeah.
when it comes to disruptive technology and innovative technology or innovative ideas,
Yeah.
how do you choose?
Okay, so this is like the really big challenge for our industry right now. And I think if you looked at various industries and where they rank in terms of innovation and digital transformation, I think construction's typically right around agriculture. Like it's, and I forgot the last stats, but we're kind of behind.
Which makes sense.
Given
your product.
Yeah.
Right?
And as a result, the impact of that is that Silicon Valley and people coming out of MIT and all these schools kind of pointed their direction towards construction. And so that's really caused a lot of solutions looking for problems to solve. And as an organization, it's like, oh, it's all this incoming, and then you've got vendors reaching out to our teams, and you've got people wanting to sign enterprise agreements, with something that maybe doesn't even have a proof of concept yet, but it sounds really cool. And so it's like, it's almost like being drunk, so we always talk about, sobriety now around, and how do you get sobriety around it? So like I said before, the venture capital ecosystem has been fabulous in helping us really vet some of that out. We've experimented with a few things. We created a process which kind of, the way I would explain it, it goes back to that old innovator's dilemma that they talk about, where it's exploit and explore. So we have all these platforms like Procore and Autodesk and things like that, and I don't know that our industry as a whole has completely exploited those platforms. And then there's some things of, they can only do so much. And so sometimes you have to insert some point solutions, right? So the impact is now we're all looking at kind of more of a complicated tech stack, right? So now we have to kind of figure out, okay, how do we exploit the existing platforms so we don't have to keep doing that? We don't need our people touching 28 different applications in the course of a day. That's really not making them more productive.
No.
And the learning part of it. And so the other part is exploring. We don't want to get caught, with behind the scenes. In terms of emerging technology. So we created a process and an approach and a team that, I don't know if it's the most elegant solution, but it seems to be working. And that is really, we call it Spark. And so far, so we both pulled in superintendents and a really diverse cohort of people. And we set up a systematic process where we review startups, and we opened up and sort of automated how, if vendors want to work with us, they can come through our website. It's called Innovate with Us. And we vet it down, and then we codify it into different groups, and then we run through, and it's almost like Shark Tank, but we kind of really refer to it as the goldfish tank because we're kind of nice. Yeah. And people, we want to have good dialogue, and we want to learn and stuff. And so what the results of that is we've gone through, since doing this about 7 months ago, I think we've gone through over 90 companies.
Wow.
And then a lot of them just weren't ready for us because they're too early. They don't really have a proof of concept, or it wasn't really relevant to what we control in the whole cycle of what we provide. And we've only said yes to 4 pilots. So we've gotten rid of a lot of noise. We also said, stop calling our people. Yeah. Like, just come, you have this angle, funnel it the right way. And so I think that's helped with getting a little bit more sobriety around being drunk on technology.
I love that because, like you said, I mean, it's how big of a net do you cast? Too big of a net, and you're not really making progress anywhere. But too small of a net, and you're like, well, am I innovating enough? Yeah. You know, so I love that process. Yeah. That's great.
The other thing that's been cool is like, so on the pilots, we're pretty careful about that. And what we do is we work with teams and say, would you like to try this? And so we bring on the project team. We identify our projects that we think from a timing perspective and a personality perspective and a client perspective, this might be really suited. We bring in the startup to have a conversation with them so that they can ask questions that maybe I didn't even anticipate. And then that gets them really excited. You can see their eyes lighten up and say, hey, I really could see some value. And then that gets that engagement. Yeah. So that they're going to have some skin in the game in terms of, getting to proof of concept or failing it out.
Mm-hmm. I think back to what you were saying about, being on the level of agriculture and, and how quickly you change and how much innovation is applied. I'm thinking about, we do workplaces. Yeah. And one of the key factors in a modern workplace is flexibility. Yeah. Building in the ability to change so that as the needs of your organization change or as hybrid models shift, you don't have to reinvest. Your floor plate can shift with the changing times and still remain effective. Is there a level of flexibility that's being considered now when you're building a large infrastructure and construction? Because I'm thinking smart cities. Yeah. There's a lot of technology opportunity, right? Yeah. But you also think about something you mentioned, concrete. Yeah. Like how often do you change that? So how do you layer in a level of flexibility into the innovation that you're considering, or is that not important?
I think it's really important. I think, the old ways of delivering a technology project internally through the organization is just probably not going to cut it in today's world. And so one of the things that we're working through is more of a scaled agile model of delivering technology projects. So it's got to be very collaborative. You're going to have short sprints. You're going to have the right people in the room making these decisions. You're going to assess where we are, and you're going to have honest dialogue. And I think that's probably a much better way to deliver technology through a large organization. Sure. And not only that, but like looking at value streams. Yeah. And really assessing, how important is pre-construction? It's so important, right, from a differentiator perspective. And then how do you really get the whole organization to understand that? And I think that helps you prioritize it. Sure. So you're not focused on a million different things. You're focused on the most important things that are going to not only help you grow, make your people more productive, and really show value for the organization.
I love that your answer was flexibility in the process.
Yeah.
Because that's going to lead to flexibility in the product.
Yep.
Right? We haven't recorded an episode since this became such a big deal, but let's talk about AI for a little bit. Everybody's talking about it. It's massively emerging technology. I think that ChatGPT had not launched when we recorded our last episode, so lots has changed since the beginning of this year. Yeah. Are you using AI in with your team, and if so, how are you approaching it? I mean, I could ask you a million questions, but let's just start with how you're thinking about AI at Gilbane.
The short answer is absolutely yes. In fact, our last board meeting was about AI and our strategy around it. I think the short answer would say, AI is up and down our tech stack, and a lot of it's table stakes, where a lot of our competitors are using, which is, 360 photo documentation, that kind of stuff. But I think the real issue is this generative AI, the large language model, which is really, there's just so much noise out there about it. And what worries me about it is that you have a lot of people listening to podcasts, reading articles, and I feel like there's a lot of people who don't really understand the true risks associated. And, there's several use cases out there where people have made some mistakes by, putting some stuff in the model and it's out there for everybody to see, with your IP and your security. So we've tried to be, again, I keep using the word intentional, but working with our folks and really understanding potential use cases and then prioritizing them that way. And so we did issue a thing that said, look, if you want to use Gen AI, let's do this together. Let's do it through use cases, and then we will prioritize it. So what we've done is we've prioritized, in particular, marketing, because we did a lot of study. We worked with MIT and other folks, and that is a pretty safe space where you can really kind of practice on this large language model. And so we're about ready to launch a pilot program. I think the other thing to say is with our buying power, we were really fortunate to be able to get into the queue with Microsoft and work with them with their platform Azure. So everything's safe and contained. So you don't have to be so scared about your IP or our client's IP getting out there. It's locked down. And so we are in the process of, in fact, this morning I was going back and forth, and I think we're going to launch that in November. And it's really about driving productivity around, how do we deliver proposals and the written word back to our clients? How do we help our operations teams with writing scope and things like that? So that's going to be really exciting. And then we've got another one that we're working on. These are the two prioritized ones. There's all kinds of things in the queue, but you can only do so much. Sure. And the other one is a third party with a really exciting startup that I'm under NDA right now, but I can't talk about it. But essentially, I can tell you that it's generative AI for our project teams. We're in the process of, we just signed the MSA, and that's going to be really exciting. So, and to me, that's really, I'm really passionate about that, because if we can make our project teams more productive and get things in their fingertips faster, I just think that's going to be a game changer for us.
So then, are you looking at AI in a sense as a way to take your current team and enhance their capabilities?
I just think it's really about how do we get our people at the highest in use of their time.
Yeah.
And there's some things that are just really redundant that we should be able to use Gen AI to become more productive, so that our marketing team can use their brains in a different way. Get more strategic. They're helping us with institutional knowledge. They're researching. It's like you think about resumes and all the the repetitive work that they have to do. It's like, I think that's going to make them more excited about their jobs. They're going to be focused on more, really collaborating on the strategic part. So that is our hope, and that's part of our hypothesis. The other part is typically on the operations side, they're so busy because they're billable, and then these proposals, we have to turn them around based on what the clients need. And it's hard to take somebody, and so oftentimes they're having to do this at 11 o'clock at night. So how can we get them in a position where they don't have to start with that white piece of paper? Like, we can give them some parameters, and then they can put the human part into it. And so that's really what I'm excited about. And look, we know that there's a problem with skilled labor in our industry, so I'm not so worried. I don't think we're gonna, regardless of what 60 Minutes said on, which scared everybody, I really think that we're gonna be able to balance this pretty well. We still need the human part. Even like they talk about hallucinations with ChatGPT, and there's all kinds of use cases out there with it just making up lies. Like court cases, law cases, and things like that. So I think you're always going to have that human component to it.
Well, and I think that's where you talk about some of the risks. There is a fear to it, and you talk about that with change communication being necessary, right? When the typewriter was replaced by the computer, it didn't mean that we didn't need people to use the computer. We just didn't. We needed them to change from typing on a typewriter to using a computer. So I think it's perspective and how you look at it. But I think there's also needs to be a bit of an understanding of what it's capable of, right? In order to be able to plan effectively. And I think that's one of the big question marks right now for a lot of teams is, what can it do? How safe, how reliable is it to do that? And, as I've got young kids myself, and I'm thinking, my 9-year-old just wrote her first essay, and it was about how many jobs will be displaced. But what she was really saying is that her classmates are going to need to learn new skills that don't even exist yet, right? So I think that's you can look at that as, oh, that's scary, but also really exciting, because there's so much opportunity in all these new capabilities that the technologies afford.
You made me think of two things. One is I was on a panel not too long ago, and we talked about the transfer from the knowledge worker to the knowledgeable worker, and how do you use the technology that's out there as some of these really skilled knowledge workers start to retire and move out of the market. So I think there's going to be a little bit of that, right? The other thing that you made me think about was FOMO. And getting caught up in the whole fear of missing out thing.
Yeah.
And because of all the podcasts and the articles out there and a lot of noise about it, it's sort of like, how do you train yourself to kind of just be disciplined, focus on what's in front of you, learn, bring people in, like with our GSMS, we've got a core group that's going to work on this, but we're also coordinating a bigger stakeholder group, with other functions, because we've created kind of almost like a RACI to say, well, you're kind of a student right now, but here are the teachers, and how do you really balance that so that people can learn? And then we get better with our next use cases. Right. So that communication piece is really going to be big. And
I think, too, to your point, even if you've got a large team, there's so much out there now. Every time I go on LinkedIn, I see a new list it's in like 4-point font because there's so many things that you can do, And it's almost like you need to connect with your peers because you don't have time to try them all. You don't have the infrastructure within your organization to try them all. But if somebody finds a really good one, I want to know about it sooner than later before my competition is using it, months ahead of me. So
sometimes though, I think we over-index what's proprietary. And so, whether it's safety or something like this, not to say that it's not important, but, I think, the industry has come together in a lot of areas, particularly around safety, where major competitors have come together and said, we need to change policy here. We need to all get on the same page about this, so I think we'll see a little bit of that too.
That's a good leeway into your perception on your industry or Gilbane, but maybe your industry as well. Are you hopeful about the future using some of these technologies, or are you? I know you have some concerns, but what kind of gives you hope around improving digital transformation or the adoption of some of these disruptive technologies at Gilbane?
What gives me hope about it is the pent-up demand. Everybody's curious about it. There's a lot of people raising their hand, really wanting to be part of the pilots, which is interesting. So that kind of gives me hope. And so then that really puts the onus on us to tell the story around it and really share that learning. What I fear is almost like what you see in politics, is just all this noise and misinformation and things like that. And so that makes me a little nervous about it. But, can we move fast enough? But I think it's just, really staying focused, keeping your, not head down, but just keeping focused and intentional around these things. When we're doing pilots, really keeping our hypothesis very tight, because it would be really easy to get scope creep around that, and then you're never getting anything done. So it's like a real tight hypothesis. If we do X, we will achieve Y. Really being very clear about the kind of the results that we're trying to get. So that's whenever I start to get nervous about it, that's why I'm like, just keep focused.
Keep focused.
Keep it intentional. Keep communicating, and be honest about where we are.
So important.
And I think, humble. You know what I mean? Like, I think, I've seen some folks out there with the hubris of technology, and there's a lot of vaporware out there. And I think for us, and what I've noticed with all of my compatriots and our competitors, everyone's got a pretty high degree of humility around this topic.
That's good.
So that's good.
It does feel, I think the pent-up demand is spot on. I mean, we had a year ago, we had a futurist on this show, and he said that, we were talking about a lot of things, but he said is that generative AI will be a bigger deal than the internet was, and possibly a bigger deal than the wheel. And so
certainly the take-up is a lot faster than the internet.
It really is. And he said, and basically, if you think about the innovation that happened right at the time where the internet started, becoming a big deal, the amount of startups, the amount of new ideas, the amount of change, it's exciting, and scary. But I love that you countered it with stay focused, because
don't get caught up in FOMO.
Sure. You don't have to be at every party.
That's right. Yeah.
At the end of each episode, we usually ask our guests a couple questions, and they're always the same, but they're kind of geared around helping others to achieve some of the success that you've had in your career. Has there been a resource that's been particularly useful for you? Maybe it's even something you're currently using, but that you could recommend to others.
Well, I'll say a non-technology resource that something was really impactful for me as I was coming up was I read a book about the art of influencing without authority. And I think it's relevant because more organizations are getting flatter and flatter. and you're having to work in a matrix organization. And so oftentimes you don't have that hierarchical support system that a lot of people kind of grew up with. And so, how do you influence people to do things on top of their very busy day jobs to work on initiatives like innovation or digital transformation? So there's a true art to it, and I do think it's the definition of leadership. I mean, it's just a whole different way of thinking about things. So any book, topic, podcast that you can, if you're younger, read about the art of influencing without authority. So that would be one thing. Another book that I love and I recommend to a lot of women in particular is the Know Your Value book that Mika Brzezinski wrote.
Okay.
And it became a whole movement. And it resonated with me because you read a lot of books, self-help books, like I won't mention them because I don't want to, I'll protect the innocent. But what resonated with me on her book was just that humility, that honesty. She didn't have sort of that false humility in there, and it was a real honest look at how do you really articulate your value if you're in a role that is different, sort of more strategic.
Sure.
And so I've often given that to a lot of people, and it's really, because it's so popular, it's created a whole movement out there. So I love that book for women.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Last question. If you are going to retire tomorrow, what's some advice you'd leave to the person who followed in your footsteps or your team?
Yeah. Couple things, I think. One is, that one kind of threw me for a loop. When you said retirement, that scared me because it's not too far away. My approach, I remember thinking about this when I lived in Chicago. It's like, what's my legacy? And I was even young when I was thinking about that. Like, what is it? Like, do I, can I make every interaction as positive as possible? I just always like to have more of a positive impact. Like, are you leaving somebody? Does somebody just need a little bit of ego booster? Do they just need a little bit extra support? Do they need some positive reinforcement? And just trying to leave every interaction in a positive way where somebody actually can benefit from it. And now that I'm getting closer to what do they say, that line is sort of ending a little bit faster than I would have thought. I think it's even more based into how I want to deliver what I do. In fact, my son this summer, before he went off to college, said to me, I think your job is really easy, Mom. And I said, well, I don't really think it's that easy, but why do you say that? And he said, because when I hear you on with your colleagues or your Teams call or your Zoom calls, you always seem to be laughing and you guys are all having fun. And I said, that's really telling, because that's how I feel. I mean, why do this if you're not going to have a little bit of fun? It doesn't mean that we're not working on hard things and we're not having hard conversations, and I think don't underestimate the power of thoughtful questions. Sometimes we get a little lazy, and if you ask that question, what keeps you up at night, you're going to really irritate people. It's like really think about the questions and then really listening to what the answers are. And I think you'll learn so much more. And I know it sounds so cliche, but I think that's really important.
It's wonderful advice. And if people have listened to this show, we've had some incredible guests on, and it has been a consistent piece of feedback.
Oh, really?
Is to be a good listener.
Good.
Ask questions and listen. Advocate for yourself. And I love the human element that you just touched on, is treat people with respect, enjoy what you do, and work-life balance is important, but work is a huge part of your life, right?
That's
so
right.
If you're enjoying it, that's I think a compliment your son gave you.
Yeah.
There. Is that the same son?
Even though he tried to say that I didn't have a hard job. But
yeah, right. Well, Kelly, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your insight. If people do want to partner with Gilbane, it's Innovate with Gilbane. Is that the website?
Yes.
Okay.
Right on our main website.
Okay.
It says Build with Us, Innovate with Us.
Wonderful.
And there's a link.
Well, thanks for everything you've shared, and thank you again for coming in to being on the show.
Thank you for your thoughtful, smart questions.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.